A massive shift is currently underway, driven by an unprecedented surge of support from the younger generation. Highly placed sources indicate Queen Camilla may have fundamentally miscalculated the strategic positioning of Prince Edward, a critical misstep that is now proving to be exceptionally costly. For decades, an undeniable pattern has governed the royal family. Edward is consistently underestimated, deemed a non-threat, and bypassed. This narrative, initially engineered by the tabloid press, painted the youngest prince as the least compelling Windsor, completely devoid of the explosive drama, scandal, and headline-generating volatility that defined his siblings. While King Charles commanded attention with a highly complicated romantic history, Princess Anne earned respect with her ironclad demeanor, and Prince Andrew remained mired in relentless controversy, Edward operated entirely under the radar. Born on March 10, 1964, at Buckingham Palace, Edward arrived nearly 13 years after Princess Anne, growing up in the formidable shadow of an already crowded royal landscape. Insiders note that Edward's resilience was forged early at Gordonstoun, the notoriously grueling Scottish boarding school designed to break privilege and build character. However, his true test under the media microscope came in January 1987. After just 5 months, Edward withdrew from officer training with the Royal Marines. The press weaponized the decision immediately, unleashing a relentless, highly reductive campaign that branded the young prince as unfit for the traditional expectations of royal masculinity. The media onslaught intensified in 1993 when Edward launched Arden Productions, a television venture that struggled commercially for nearly a decade before closing in 2002. To the public, it was framed as yet another high-profile failure, providing endless ammunition for the narrative of a prince who simply could not succeed. But behind the scenes, a completely different story was unfolding, one the press entirely failed to cover. While the media focused on commercial losses, Prince Edward was quietly executing a masterclass in institutional loyalty. Sources close to the palace confirmed that Edward was systematically building an impeccable reputation for absolute discretion, unwavering reliability, and an intense dedication to the crown. By taking over and massively expanding the prestigious Duke of Edinburgh's award program, Edward secured the deep respect of institutional insiders. The estate remains firmly in Edward's hands, and as the sheer numbers of his young supporters continue to swell, the palace is realizing a critical truth: the prince they ignored for decades may now hold the most powerful hand of all. Overseas visits, institutional engagements, and a steady, consistent, unshowy presence at the machinery of the monarchy have kept the institution functioning between major ceremonial moments. This reputation was built collectively by Prince Edward and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, two individuals operating in parallel with an identical understanding of what the institution required from them. They remain the most genuinely matched couple in the modern royal family, sharing a fundamental orientation toward their roles. By the time Queen Elizabeth II passed away in September 2022, Edward's standing inside the family was considerably stronger than public perception suggested. The King, Sophie, and senior royal household staff were well aware that Edward was a trusted, capable, and deeply loyal member of the institution. Queen Camilla, however, either did not. At the center of this developing situation is Bagshot Park, a major royal estate located in Surrey, approximately 30 miles southwest of London. Inside the British royal family, property represents history, identity, and the physical expression of continuity. Bagshot Park is a substantial Victorian mansion set within roughly 50 acres of countryside, featuring 30 rooms and extensive gardens. Edward and Sophie have resided at Bagshot Park since 2002, making it the quiet, stable center of their family life for more than 2 decades, where their children, Lady Louise Windsor and James, Earl of Wessex, were raised. It serves as Edward's primary workspace and the operational base for Sophie's expanded charitable and diplomatic portfolio. The threat to this foundation stems from the complex nature of royal property tenure. Senior royals do not outright own their residences. Instead, properties exist within a network of institutional ownership, crown estate management, and royal household allocation. Bagshot Park is a crown estate property allocated to Edward and Sophie as an official residence. Because allocation does not equal absolute ownership, a vulnerability emerged, one that Camilla reportedly identified as an opportunity. Highly placed sources indicate that conversations regarding Bagshot Park began immediately following King Charles III's accession in September 2022. The change in reign triggered a wholesale review of royal property allocations across the estate to reorganize the physical infrastructure of the monarchy. While these reviews are standard administrative procedures, their execution remains deeply political. Camilla engaged with this review process in ways that exceeded household expectations, focusing her unstated interests directly on Bagshot Park. The strategy was never intended to be publicly stated. This is an ambition that operates entirely behind closed doors through the quiet deployment of influence and carefully timed suggestions. Inside the royal family, institutional maneuvering relies heavily on these methods, executed with precision by experienced operators. High-level sources indicate that the argument advancing Queen Camilla's interests was framed in ostensibly practical terms. Bagshot Park is a massive property, and the narrative suggested that Prince Edward and Sophie, as a couple without a full complement of working royal duties, could reasonably be expected to vacate the estate to better serve the institution's current needs. While framed in administrative language, the proposal carried devastating personal implications. Edward and Sophie had spent 2 decades building their life at Bagshot Park, raising their children there, and utilizing the estate as Sophie's expanded operational base. The pressure to relocate was viewed not as a routine administrative proposal, but as a direct challenge to the stability of their family foundation, originating from a direction Edward had not initially anticipated. The move was designed to appear institutional rather than personal, presenting a calculated power grab disguised as a sensible reorganization focused on efficiency. Edward eventually identified the underlying strategy, initiating a response that caught palace insiders entirely off guard. Every major power move within the British royal family dictates that it must never look like a power move. The appearance of institutional neutrality remains the most valuable cover for any agenda. Personal ambition is routinely dressed in the language of practical necessity. The groundwork for this specific strategy was laid gradually in the months following King Charles III's accession in the autumn of 2022. The process began not with a direct confrontation over the property, but with broader discussions regarding. The prevailing argument advanced by Queen Camilla's allies asserted that Bagshot Park's current occupants, while valuable working members of the royal family, did not require a residence of such substantial scale to execute their duties. Alternative properties were suggested as adequate substitutes, while Bagshot Park, with its vast acreage and strategic proximity to London, could be repurposed to serve the Crown's immediate priorities. The specific details of that repurposing, and the identities of the intended beneficiaries, were deliberately withheld to establish the broader principle of structural change before introducing controversial specifics. Camilla's allies targeted the administrative tier first, securing bureaucratic assessments that framed Bagshot Park as underutilized. These maneuvers occurred entirely outside the natural visibility of Prince Edward and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, who were not routinely monitoring these specialized administrative channels. The second phase of the operation required direct engagement with King Charles III. Recognizing the king's deeply ingrained aversion to being maneuvered, the proposal was calibrated with exceptional care. It was never presented as Camilla's personal agenda. Instead, it was introduced as an independent, emerging consensus generated by the household's routine administrative review. Camilla positioned herself merely as a supportive voice for an institutional decision made on practical grounds. The strategy failed to account for a critical vulnerability. Edward discovered the operation. Alerted not by formal notification, but by a supportive contact within the household machinery, Edward became aware of the shifting administrative currents. The unraveling of the plan featured no dramatic public confrontations. Instead, inconsistencies in the official narrative allowed Edward to systematically identify and dismantle the quiet bureaucratic campaign against his estate. Prince Edward was paying close attention. High-level sources confirm that the conversation that shifted the trajectory of this palace conflict occurred in the early part of 2023. While the identity of the individual who initiated the meeting remains strictly confidential, It is verified that the source was positioned deeply enough within the administrative process to understand the true drivers behind the property review. Motivated by personal and professional loyalty to Edward, the individual delivered a brief but critical briefing. The intelligence provided was sufficient for Edward to realize that the review of Bagshot Park's allocation was not the neutral administrative exercise it claimed to be, but rather a manufactured process shaped by non-institutional interests designed to make a specific outcome look inevitable by the time it reached King Charles III. Demonstrating significant tactical discipline, Edward chose not to react immediately. Rather than initiating a premature confrontation with the king, household administrators, or Queen Camilla, Edward took time to analyze the intelligence and systematically gather data. Utilizing his extensive knowledge of the royal household's internal machinery, he quietly accessed documents, meeting records, and internal correspondence trails without alerting administrative tracking systems. The uncovered paper trail confirmed a distinct pattern of irregular administrative activity regarding Bagshot Park. Inquiries concerning the property's allocation had bypassed routine review protocols, and assessments had been commissioned to support predetermined conclusions. Having identified the operational footprint of the campaign, Edward executed his first countermove. Instead of targeting Camilla directly, Edward moved to secure his position with the king before the official, curated version of the property review could be presented through Camilla's cultivated channels. This maneuver bypassed the entire sequencing. Disrupting the timeline entirely, Edward bypassed standard official channels, which would have been visible to household administrators and Camilla's allies, and utilized his direct personal access as the king's brother. He secured a private audience with King Charles III before the administrative review could reach the royal desk. While the specific details of the private discussion remained strictly confidential, the immediate consequences became clear within the household machinery. The administrative momentum surrounding the review of Bagshot Park halted, and the push for reallocation abruptly ceased. Assessments that had been rapidly heading toward formal recommendations were quietly shelved as King Charles III personally intervened to halt the administrative machinery. Queen Camilla's allies within the household felt the shift almost immediately. Their specialized access became restricted, and the bureaucratic momentum they had cultivated completely dissipated without any formal announcement. It was clear to all involved that Prince Edward had intercepted the operation and exposed the strategy before it could achieve its objective. What followed was not merely a defensive maneuver, but a highly targeted strategic counteroffensive. Edward transitioned from a reactive posture to a calculated long-game strategy, designed to permanently raise the stakes for any future challenges to his position. His first move appeared routine on the surface but was highly deliberate in execution. Edward accelerated his and Sophie's public engagement schedule, specifically targeting high-visibility institutional appearances. Rather than filling their diaries with minor charitable events, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh focused on occasions carrying immense institutional weight, including key military engagements, Commonwealth events, and formal ceremonies that required the explicit trust of the sovereign. Sophie moved in parallel, visibly amplifying her expanded patronage portfolio and undertaking high-profile diplomatic deployments. Together, their prominent presence sent an unmistakable signal to the household that their standing was secure and non-negotiable. This public demonstration, however, was only the preliminary phase. Edward's second move was far more direct and personal, leveraging a critical alliance he had quietly cultivated for years away from public and media scrutiny. His relationship with Prince William. The alliance between Prince Edward and Prince William represents a critical, understated shift in internal palace dynamics. Born nearly 2 decades apart, the two grew up in vastly different eras of the monarchy, yet a quiet solidarity has solidified between them following the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. This bond is rooted in a shared perspective on the institution. One that prioritizes genuine service and rejects the manipulation of royal machinery for personal advancement. Edward approached the Prince of Wales not with an exhaustive brief on Queen Camilla's operations against Bagshot Park, but with a highly strategic disclosure. He provided sufficient intelligence to ensure William fully understood the nature of the bureaucratic maneuver. This calculated move placed the heir to the throne on high alert, altering how he would interpret Camilla's structural and administrative movements going forward. The impact of William's heightened scrutiny was immediate. Household staff advancing the Queen's interests suddenly found their operational space severely restricted, knowing the future monarch was actively monitoring their administrative decisions. This unspoken surveillance effectively paralyzed the remaining elements of the campaign. The definitive conclusion to the conflict came directly from King Charles III. Bypassing further administrative debate, the sovereign issued a formal, final decree through official channels. Edward and Sophie's tenure at Bagshot Park was officially confirmed, not subjected to further review or ongoing assessment. The precise, unyielding institutional language permanently closed the door on any future reallocations. The fallout from the failed operation has profoundly altered the internal landscape of the palace. Within an institution entirely dependent on the meticulous management of perception, the failed power grab has exposed the underlying strategic ambitions of the Queen's faction. Palace insiders note that the initial shifts are already reverberating through the senior staff level, permanently reshaping institutional alliances and trust. The internal environment of the royal household is highly sensitive to atmospheric shifts, and palace staff immediately detected a distinct change in how Prince Edward and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, were treated following King Charles III's confirmation of their Bagshot Park tenure. The administrative deference that had been quietly withheld during the height of the property review returned entirely, signaling to institutional insiders that the couple's position was secure and that those who predicted their displacement had severely miscalculated. For Queen Camilla, the strategic fallout has materialized on two distinct fronts. On a practical level, the administrative channels utilized to advance the campaign against Bagshot Park are now severely compromised. On a personal level, the implications are even more enduring. While King Charles III may not possess the granular details of the operation, high-level sources confirm he acquired sufficient intelligence to intervene decisively. His formal confirmation of the estate's allocation was executed without prior consultation with Camilla, a stark departure from standard domestic protocol that underscores an unspoken awareness of her faction's underlying agenda. Camilla remains unable to challenge the methodology of the king's decision without exposing the very actions that prompted it, resulting in a total and absolute silence on the matter between the sovereign and the queen. Edward and Sophie continue their residence at Bagshot Park, maintaining the operational and charitable foundations they have constructed over the past 2 decades. The permanent resolution of this conflict leaves the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh in an undeniably stronger position within the institution, having successfully neutralized a direct, strategic challenge to their security,